Hi there, my name is Shelby Hunt, and I was asked to share with you guys a short devotional about suffering for God's glory. Now, you may have guessed from my accent, I'm not Welsh. In fact, me and my wife, we moved here about 2 years ago. You see, me and my wife, we have a habit of trying to do whatever God opens the door for us. So if God leads us to a certain place, we try to be faithful to follow His leading. But what we've discovered in our lives is that just because we're following where God leads, doesn't mean it's always going to be easy. In fact, a lot of times where God leads you, He leads you through hardships. Now, Psalm 23 is a famous psalm, right? A lot of people like to quote it, a lot of people like to reflect on it, and they really like to reflect on the beginning part, right? There's a famous verse that talks about how God will lead you beside still waters and guide you to let you lie down in green pastures. He will restore your soul. These images of a God that just cares for us and takes care of us, and those are great images. And I don't want to discredit them at all, because that is a God that we serve. That is our God. But the next verse in Psalm 23 talks about how you will walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Psalm 23 isn't just promising that all of life is going to be this great green pasture, or that it's going to be these still waters, that there are going to be valleys that we're going to have to walk through. Now, I don't know if these are as popular here as they were back in the States, but I enjoyed growing up watching a few Western movies. And oftentimes in the Western movies, there would always be these scenes where the characters would come up and they would be walking through a valley. They would be walking through this canyon, and then you would look up on the sides and they couldn't see anybody, but then the camera would cut and it would show that there's people hiding in the rocks, right? And they're all getting ready to ambush the people down below. And that's the picture of this, right? When you're walking through a valley, you're defenseless. The people around you, if there's people setting up an ambush, you don't have a way to protect yourself from. You are in the open. They have the high ground. But we can walk through that valley because we know who's guiding us through that. We know that God is with us. And so we're told that we don't have to fear, right? We're told that even though we're walking through the valley of the shadow of death, we will fear no evil because God is with us. And when I think about this, I reflect also back on Paul, and he writes in 2 Corinthians 12, he says, "So to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from being conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weakness, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong.'" A few points I want to make from this passage. Paul, first, it says he was given the thorn, right? He didn't ask for it. He didn't want it. It was given to him. And I think when I look at that, it shows a truth that sometimes we like to shy away from, and that's the fact that God is going to allow us to suffer. There's going to be times where you're going to wondering, why is this happening? But the truth is that God has allowed that to happen and has allowed you to be in those places, right? Paul didn't want to have this thorn, right? He pleads 3 times for God to take it away. This wasn't something that was nice. But we need to recognize that, and just as Paul, I think, recognizes, is that this was something that God allowed to happen. But as we see, the next point I want to point out is that even though this was something that Satan was using, this says it was a messenger of Satan that was tormenting Paul, Paul recognizes that it was also something that God used. Right? Suffering isn't just one-sided. It isn't all bad. God, in fact, often uses our sufferings to help us. We can see that even though it says this thorn was from Satan, that it was something that God was using, because Paul says that it was for him to help him not become conceited. And I'm going to tell you, the devil wants you to become conceited. Because if you become conceited, then you just become full of yourself. And if you're full of yourself, there's no room for God in you. So we know that Paul is recognizing that this thorn, in a way, is a divine helper. It's something that's actually there to help Paul become a better person, even though he didn't see it at the time. This thorn is something that, even though it's from the devil, it was allowed by God to torment him. God was using it to help shape Paul to be a person that he could use in powerful ways. Lastly, and kind of the ultimate point that I want to make here is that Paul had to deal with this so that God would be glorified, right? The whole point that Paul says is that whole phrase of, when you're weak, I am made strong, right? By being put in a low position, Paul had to lean on God. Paul had to have God give him the strength to get through that. And when that happens, when you are relying on God to get you through these hard times, that brings God glory. Because even though it's something that happening to you, the people around you will also notice. And when people see that and wonder, how can you get through this hard time? And you tell them, well, it's because God's given me the strength to get through that. It points that to him. And that's the ultimate purpose of this. It's to bring God glory. I think the whole point of this is to show that suffering will come. And one of my favorite Christian comedians kind of talked about how we are going to have to deal with suffering this way. He said that life's like this, right? Life is a series of ups and downs. You're always kind of going like this. Sometimes you're staying up here, sometimes you're down here, sometimes you're coasting in the middle, but it's always kind of just this ebb and flow. And he pointed out that Jesus said he had come to give us life, right? Jesus came to give us this, but more abundantly, right? This is the Christian life. We're going to have amazing highs, and we're going to have amazing lows. But the thing we can do to get through that is we can realize that the same God that has brought us up to here, to this amazing high, is the same God that's walking with us when we're down here in this amazing low. Psalm 23, it ends by talking about how God's going to make a table for you in the presence of your enemies. And I don't know if you ever really thought about that, but this is such an interesting picture, because it's saying that God's not going to always let you be just surrounded by people you love or people that love you, but there's going to be times where you're surrounded by people who hate you and people who want to do harm to you. And even in those times, you can find just rest, right? You can have a meal. A meal means that you're sitting down, you're eating, and you're just relaxed. Even though you are surrounded by people that don't want any good for you, God's putting you there and God's going to protect you. So how do you suffer for God's glory, right? How can you, when you're suffering, how can you do it for God's glory? Well, just 3 things I want to leave with you real quick. First, you need to understand that suffering will come, right? Being a Christian doesn't mean you have some magic bubble that somehow protects you from just bad things happening. You need to realize that that's going to be a truth, that as you live your Christian life, you are going to have to face hardships and you are going to suffer. But second, when you are in that valley, when those times are going on, remember who's guiding you through it. You don't have to figure out how to get through the valley by yourself. You're not alone. And third, you don't need to fix the situation. When you're suffering, I think a lot of us, I know for me personally at least, one of the first things I try to do is I figure out, okay, how can I fix the situation? How can I make this better on my own? And God's like, you don't need to do that. Just sit there. Enjoy the meal that I'm going to put in front of you, and let me take care of it. And so, just know that suffering will come, but when it comes, God's there beside you to give you strength. You just have to accept it. Let me pray for you guys. Dear God, thank you so much for this time. I just pray for everybody who is on this call, who's listening. I pray that you will bless them. I pray that you will give them strength. And God, I pray that when they are suffering, when they go through hardships, even if they might be in a hardship right now, that they will feel your presence, that they will know that you love them, and that they will know that you're there guiding them through it. I pray that they will be able to look back at times where they've suffered, times where they've faced hardships, and realize that you were there, shaping them to be more like your Son, sanctifying them so that they may bring glory to you, and that you love them, God, more than they will ever know. In your name, amen. Thank you so much.